This room feels perfectly comfortable. The thermostat looks normal, the air feels cool, and nothing about the space seems extreme. But the orchid, sitting only a few feet away, may be living in a very different climate. Every time the air conditioner turns on, its leaves move. The aerial roots dry faster. The surface of the bark looks dry sooner than expected. And if the plant is in bud, those developing flowers may be exposed to repeated drafts and temperature changes that you barely notice. That is what makes this problem so easy to miss. The orchid does not have to look seriously sick at first. It may still be green, it may still have flowers, it may even have a few healthy roots. The first warning can be something much more ordinary. A leaf that feels a little less firm, a root that turns silver very quickly, or a pot that seems ready for water sooner than usual. And that can lead to the wrong conclusion. You see a thirsty-looking plant, so you water it again. But before you reach for the watering can, there is one question worth asking. Are all of the roots actually drying at the same rate? By the end of this video, you will know 8 ways air conditioning can quietly stress an indoor orchid, how to tell the difference between useful air movement and a direct conditioned draft, why the driest looking part of the pot can mislead you, and how to find a safer place for your orchid without turning off your air conditioner. The first thing to understand is that your thermostat is not measuring your orchid's entire world. It is measuring the temperature where the sensor is located. Your plant may be several feet away, beside a window, under a vent, on a shelf, near a wall, or directly in the path of moving air. Those small differences in location can create very different conditions around the leaves and roots. That is why the best place to begin is not with a fertilizer bottle or a repotting tool. Begin with the space around the plant. Stand where the orchid is sitting. Watch the leaves when the air conditioner turns on. Hold your hand near the plant and notice whether you can feel a steady stream of air. If you have a small thermometer or hygrometer, place it close to the orchid for a while, instead of relying only on the thermostat across the room. The goal is not to create a laboratory. The goal is simply to measure where the orchid actually lives. And once you do that, the first 2 problems become much easier to understand. One useful way to think about this is to stop treating the room as a single climate. A room has layers and pathways. Warm air rises, cool air falls. Sunlight can warm one side of the space while conditioned air cools another. A shelf close to a window may receive more radiant heat than the thermostat senses, while a plant under a vent may be cooled every few minutes. The orchid experiences all of those small changes at leaf level and root level. That is why 2 orchids in the same room can behave differently even when they are watered on the same day. One may sit in a calm spot and dry gradually. The other may sit in moving air and show silver aerial roots much sooner. If you only compare the calendar, the difference makes no sense. If you compare the microclimate, it begins to make sense. This also gives you a better way to troubleshoot. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with my orchid?" ask, "What changed around my orchid? Did the weather get hotter, causing the air conditioner to run longer? Did you move the plant closer to a vent? Did you close a door and change the airflow through the room? Did you place the orchid higher on a shelf where the vent reaches it more directly?" Small environmental changes can explain why a plant that seemed stable for months suddenly begins drying differently. The first is dry air. Air conditioning removes heat from indoor air, and in many homes, the conditioned environment can also feel much drier than the outdoor air. For an orchid growing indoors, especially a Phalaenopsis with exposed aerial roots, that can change how quickly moisture is lost from the plant and from the top of the potting mix. You may notice that aerial roots turn silver sooner. The upper pieces of bark may feel dry long before you expected. A leaf may lose some firmness between waterings. None of those signs should be ignored, but none of them should be used alone to decide that the entire orchid needs more water. That distinction is important. Aerial roots are exposed directly to room air, so of course they can dry faster than roots buried deeper in bark or moss. The top of a pot also receives more moving air than the center. If you judge the entire root system by the driest roots you can see, you can easily shorten your watering interval when the deeper roots are not ready. And dry air is only part of the story. The second problem is direct airflow. Orchid growers often hear that orchids need air movement, and that is true. Gentle air movement helps prevent stagnant conditions and helps moisture evaporate from leaves and potting media. But useful air movement is not the same thing as placing an orchid directly in a concentrated stream coming from an air conditioning vent. A direct draft can hit the same leaves, buds, aerial roots, and side of the pot every time the system runs. That means the plant may not experience the room evenly. One side can dry faster than the other. The top can dry faster than the center. A flower spike can sit in a moving stream while the lower roots remain protected inside the pot. Here is a simple clue. If the leaves visibly move every time the air conditioner turns on, the orchid is not merely in a room with air conditioning. It is sitting inside the airflow pump. That does not mean the plant is doomed. It means the location deserves a closer look. There is another reason direct airflow deserves attention. It can create a false sense of safety after watering. The top of the bark may dry quickly, so the surface looks clean and airy. That can make the whole pot seem well ventilated. But fast evaporation at the top does not prove that the middle of the pot has the same oxygen and moisture conditions. This matters especially when decorative cachepots are involved. Many grocery store Phalaenopsis orchids arrive in a clear plastic inner pot placed inside a decorative outer container. The inner pot may have drainage holes, but the outer pot can reduce airflow around the sides and bottom. If the top is being dried by AC, while the lower part remains enclosed, the contrast between top and center can become even greater. So when you inspect an orchid near an air conditioner, do not stop at the visible surface. Lift the inner pot if it is safe to do so. Make sure drainage water is not sitting in the outer container. Look at the lower roots through the clear plastic. The more information you collect, the less likely you are to mistake one dry area for a dry root system. And this is where many beginners get trapped by a very reasonable idea. If moving air is good, more moving air must be better. But orchid care rarely works that way. The goal is balance. You want enough circulation to avoid stagnant, constantly wet conditions, without placing the plant in a harsh, focused draft that repeatedly changes the environment around it. Dry air and direct airflow are the first two problems, but the next one can be even harder to notice because it happens in cycles. Every time the system turns on, the air near a vent can cool quickly. When it turns off, that area moves back toward the general room conditions. If the orchid is sitting directly in that changing zone, the leaves, flower spike, and developing buds may experience repeated temperature shifts that are greater than what you feel in the middle of the room. For a healthy vegetative plant, small environmental changes may not create an obvious emergency. But if the plant is already stressed, if the roots are compromised, or if the orchid is developing buds, repeated drafts and temperature instability belong on the checklist of things to investigate. This is especially important with Phalaenopsis. Bud blast can have many causes, and it would be a mistake to blame every failed bud on the air conditioner. Changes in watering, root health, low light, pests, sudden relocation, and other environmental stresses can also play a role. But direct drafts and temperature fluctuations are recognized stress factors. So when buds begin to yellow, shrivel, or drop before opening, the vent above the plant is worth noticing. Still, temperature swings are not the most misleading problem in this video. The most confusing part begins inside the pot. Imagine a clear Phalaenopsis pot filled with bark. The top layer is exposed to the room. Aerial roots are hanging outside. One side of the pot faces the air conditioner. The center of the pot is protected by layers of bark, roots, and trapped moisture. Those different areas are not going to dry at exactly the same speed. This is the fourth problem: uneven root drying. The roots near the surface may turn silver quickly. The bark at the top may feel dry. The side facing the draft may lose moisture faster, but deeper roots can still be in a much more humid environment. If the pot is packed tightly, if the bark is old, if there is sphagnum moss in the center, or if the container has limited ventilation, the difference can become even more important. This is why a transparent orchid pot can be so useful. It gives you more information than the top surface alone. You can look through the side and compare the roots near the wall of the pot with the roots you see higher up. You can notice whether there is still condensation, You can look at the color and condition of the roots, rather than making a decision from one dry-looking piece of bark. The roots you notice first are not always the roots that should make the watering decision. And now we reach the fifth problem, the one that can turn a dry-looking orchid into an overwatering mistake. The surface can look dry, while the center is still moist. This is where the entire story changes. At first, the plant seems to be drying too fast because of the air conditioner. The aerial roots are silver. The bark on top is dry. Maybe one leaf has started to soften, so you think the safest response is to water more often. But what if the center of the pot is still holding moisture? If you water again because the surface looks dry, the upper roots get wet, but the inner media also receives another full watering before it has had enough time to approach dryness. Repeat that cycle often enough, and the inner root zone can remain wet for too long even while the surface repeatedly looks dry. That is why something that looks like underwatering can slowly become an overwatering problem. Notice the wording here. Air conditioning does not directly cause root rot. Root rot is a root health problem associated with damaged roots and poor conditions around them, and there can be several contributing factors. The issue here is that an air-conditioned draft can make the visible parts of the pot dry faster, which can mislead you into watering before the less visible parts are ready. That is a very different claim, and it leads to a much better solution. Do not automatically water more often. First, improve the way you check the pot. Look deeper through a transparent container if you have one. Compare several roots instead of one aerial root. Notice whether the pot still feels heavier from retained moisture if you are familiar with the weight of your own orchid when wet and when nearly dry. Pay attention to how quickly the whole pot dries after a thorough watering, not just how quickly the top changes color, and avoid watering strictly by the calendar. A schedule can remind you to check the orchid, but the plant should decide whether it is ready. This is also why repotting can sometimes reveal information you did not have before. You may discover that the outer bark is coarse and airy, while the center contains older, more compact material that stays wet much longer. But do not repot a healthy orchid simply because you watched this video. Repot when there is a reason, such as degraded media, poor drainage, root problems, or a plant that genuinely needs a better root environment. Before making a major change, diagnose first. Now look at the leaves, because the sixth problem often appears there. A healthy Phalaenopsis leaf should generally feel firm and well hydrated. When a plant loses more water than its roots can replace, the leaves can become softer or develop wrinkles. That is an important sign, but it is not a complete diagnosis. This is one of the most common mistakes in orchid care. Seeing a wrinkled leaf and immediately deciding the plant needs more frequent watering. A wrinkled leaf tells you that water balance is not right. It does not tell you why. The plant may genuinely be too dry. The roots may have stayed dry for too long, but the same leaf symptom can also appear when roots are unhealthy and cannot take up water effectively. A plant can sit in wet media and still look dehydrated if enough roots have been damaged. That is why you have to check leaves and roots together. So if a leaf looks thirsty in an air-conditioned room, do not ask only, "When did I water last?" Ask, "What condition are the roots in? Is the center of the pot still moist? Is this plant sitting in a direct draft? Has the drying pattern changed since the air conditioner started running more often?" That sequence of questions protects you from treating a symptom instead of the cause. And there is another clue on the leaves. If one side of the plant seems to lose moisture faster, or if the leaves are constantly moving in the same direction whenever the system starts, that tells you something about exposure. The orchid is giving you information about the room, but if the plant is in spike, the next warning can be even more frustrating than a soft leaf. When you evaluate a soft or wrinkled leaf, also pay attention to which leaf is changing. An older, lower leaf can naturally age and eventually yellow, while the rest of the plant remains healthy. A sudden loss of firmness across several leaves is a different pattern. Again, one symptom means very little without context. Feel the leaves gently rather than bending or squeezing them. Look for a trend over time. Is the plant gradually losing firmness between waterings and recovering after a proper watering? Or Are the leaves staying limp even though the media remains wet? Those two patterns point you toward very different questions. This is where patience becomes part of diagnosis. Orchids do not always respond visibly within hours of an environmental adjustment. If you move a plant to a better location, you are looking for a more stable pattern over time, not an instant transformation. New roots, continued leaf growth, and a more predictable wet-to-dry cycle are more meaningful than expecting an old wrinkled leaf to become perfectly smooth again. And remember that existing damage may not reverse completely. The goal is healthier, new growth, and a more stable plant, not making every old leaf look as if nothing ever happened. The seventh problem is bud stress. There are few things more disappointing than watching a Phalaenopsis develop a flower spike, form healthy-looking buds, and then lose one or more buds before they open. Growers often search immediately for a single cause, but bud blast is usually a signal to investigate the entire environment. Direct drafts are one factor to consider. Rapid temperature changes are another. Watering stress, root damage, low light, pests, relocation, and other sudden environmental changes can also contribute. So if your orchid is in bud and it sits directly under or in front of an air conditioning vent, move draft exposure higher on your checklist. Do not panic and move the plant through 5 different locations in one day. Sudden changes can create more stress. Instead, choose a better position that still provides appropriate light and a more stable environment. Then observe. And here is an important retention point for anyone who has an orchid with perfect-looking buds right now. You do not need to wait for bud blast before you evaluate the location. Prevention is much easier than trying to identify a cause after several buds have already failed. Look at the direction of the vent. Watch what moves when the system starts. Notice whether the flower spike is directly in that path. If it is, you already have useful information. If buds are already present, stability becomes especially valuable. Try to avoid unnecessary relocation from room to room, sudden blasts from heating or cooling vents, and repeated changes in watering just because you are nervous about the flowers. The plant has already invested energy in that spike and those buds. Your job is to keep the environment as consistent as reasonably possible. If one bud fails, do not immediately assume the rest are doomed. Check the basics. Is the spike still firm? Are the remaining buds developing normally? Are the roots healthy? Has the plant recently been moved from a store, a car, or another room? Has the air conditioner begun running much more often because outdoor temperatures changed? That broader context matters. For grocery store orchids, this is especially important because the plant may have already experienced several environmental transitions before it reached your home. It may have moved from a greenhouse to transportation, to a store display, and then to your room. Adding a direct AC draft on top of those changes can make diagnosis even more complicated. The safer approach is to provide stable care rather than reacting aggressively to every small change. Now we come to the 8th problem. And this one is exactly why the word quietly belongs in the title. Sometimes the orchid does not lose leaves. It does not lose buds. The roots do not suddenly rot. Nothing dramatic happens. The plant simply slows down. A root tip that was actively extending seems to stop. A new leaf takes longer than expected to size up. The orchid remains alive, but does not appear to make much progress. This can be difficult to diagnose because slow growth can have many explanations. Light may be too low. The season may be different. The roots may need attention. The media may be old. Nutrition may be inadequate. The plant may be recovering from flowering, repotting, or another stress. Air conditioning is not the automatic answer. But if the orchid is otherwise receiving reasonable care, and it spends every day in a direct, cool, dry draft, the location should be part of your investigation. The key is not to change everything at once. If you move the plant, radically change the watering schedule, add more fertilizer, repot it, and change the light all in the same week, you will have no idea which change helped and which one created another problem. Start with the obvious environmental issue. Move the orchid out of the direct airflow path while preserving good light. Then watch how the plant and the potting mix respond over time. Does the pot dry more evenly? Do the leaves remain more stable between waterings? Do new root tips continue growing? Those observations are more useful than making 5 interventions at once. Slow growth also has to be judged in context. Orchids do not grow at the same speed every week of the year, and a plant that has just finished a heavy bloom may redirect its energy differently than a plant in active vegetative growth. What you are looking for is not a stopwatch. You are looking for a pattern. Take a photo of the roots and newest leaf today. Compare again later under similar conditions. Marking progress visually can be more reliable than memory. A root tip that appears unchanged from day to day may actually be extending slowly. A new leaf may be widening even if it is not getting dramatically longer. The value of this approach is that it prevents unnecessary rescue behavior. A stable orchid that is simply growing slowly does not need to be pulled apart every time you feel impatient. If the roots are firm, the media is appropriate, the plant receives suitable light, and there is no sign of disease or pests, environmental fine-tuning may be all that is needed. So where should the orchid actually go? This is the final payoff, and the answer is more useful than a fixed distance from the air conditioner. Do not think in feet, think in zones. The first zone is the avoid zone. This is the direct airflow path. It may be directly under the vent, directly in front of it, or anywhere the leaves and flowers are repeatedly hit by the conditioned stream. If the leaves move every time the system turns on, this zone is easy to identify. The second is the caution zone. The plant is not being blasted directly, but conditions may still change quickly when the system runs. A shelf near the vent, the edge of the airflow path, or a location where the pot dries unusually fast could fall into this category. This does not automatically make the location unusable. It means you should measure and observe. The third is the safer zone. This is a position with appropriate bright indirect light for a Phalaenopsis. No strong direct AC stream, gentle circulation, and a more stable drying pattern. You can still inspect the roots easily. You can still water thoroughly and allow the pot to approach dryness appropriately. The plant is not trapped in stagnant air, but it is also not being repeatedly hit by a cold, dry draft. And the safest location is not automatically the point farthest from the air conditioner. That is important because many people solve the AC problem by moving an orchid into a dark corner. Now the draft is gone, but the plant does not receive enough light. One environmental problem has been replaced by another. The better question is, where in this room do light, temperature, moisture, and air movement stay in the best balance? A bright window can be excellent if the light is appropriate and the plant is protected from harsh direct sun. A table a little outside the AC path may be better than a shelf directly below the vent. Sometimes moving a plant only a short distance sideways can make a major difference in exposure because the airflow is directional. Use the room you actually have. You do not need a perfect greenhouse. You need a stable, observable position where you can understand what the plant is experiencing. Here is a simple way to test a new location. First, watch the leaves when the air conditioner turns on. They should not be repeatedly pushed by a strong direct stream. Second, check the light. Moving away from the vent should not mean moving away from the light your orchid needs. Third, monitor the pot after watering. See whether the surface and the deeper root zone begin to dry in a more predictable pattern. Fourth, check the plant instead of relying on the thermostat. If you have a small thermometer or hygrometer, use it at plant level. Fifth, change only what needs changing. Do not increase fertilizer because the room is dry. Do not repot because one aerial root is silver. Do not water because the top bark looks pale. Use multiple clues. And before we finish, there are 3 things I would not change all at once. I would not move the orchid, dramatically increase watering, and add more fertilizer on the same day. I would not move it out of the AC draft and place it in deep shade just to get farther from the vent. And I would not assume every soft leaf, failed bud, or slow root tip was caused by air conditioning. Good orchid care is not about finding one villain. It is about reading the plant and the environment together. If your orchid grows in an air-conditioned room, run through this quick checklist. Is the plant directly in the airflow path? Do the leaves move when the system turns on? Does the top of the pot dry much faster than the center? Are aerial roots making you think the entire pot is dry? Are you watering by appearance or by checking the root zone more carefully? Are the leaves losing firmness? Are developing buds exposed to repeated drafts or temperature changes? Has the plant slowed down even though the other parts of its care seem reasonable? If several of those clues point in the same direction, adjust the environment before you change everything else. Move the plant out of the direct stream. Keep the light appropriate. Observe how the roots and media dry. Recheck your watering based on the whole pot, not the driest looking surface. And remember the most important idea from this video. Your orchid experiences the air around its leaves and roots, not the number displayed on the thermostat across the room. Air conditioning does not automatically make a room unsafe for orchids. Many Phalaenopsis orchids can grow well indoors in homes that use air conditioning. The goal is simply to avoid the harshest microclimate and give the plant a more stable combination of light, moisture, temperature, and gentle air movement. Once you start looking at the room from the orchid's point of view, many confusing symptoms become easier to investigate. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this helped you understand your orchid's environment a little better, give the video a like and subscribe for more practical orchid care. And tell me in the comments, is your orchid growing in an air-conditioned room, and where is it sitting in relation to the vent? Your answer may help another grower recognize the same problem in their own home.